Hello there, and welcome to the World Storytelling Cafe. Here is the place where you can come and listen to tales from all around the world. What an amazing thing! How great is this? And it's so lovely to be here, to be back here, and to have an opportunity to share some more stories with you. But before I do, I would just like to draw your attention to something which is just down here. Can you see? Just down below this little square where you're looking at me now, you'll see a virtual hat. Now, every single storyteller that's telling here at the World Storytelling Cafe has got a virtual hat, so that if you feel moved, which hopefully you will, during the story, after the story, at any point at all, if you feel moved to chuck a few coins into that virtual hat, it will be very much appreciated. So I'm going to share a story with you today about a fool. Now, when I say a fool, there may be all sorts of different images that come to mind. Maybe you'll think about a medieval fool with a hat with bells on it, or maybe you'll think about the kind of fool that we find in folk tales, the kind of fool that puts milk into his pockets and cheese on his head, or a donkey on his back. Maybe the kind of fool you're thinking of is possibly a man, because a lot of the time when we hear about fools in stories, they often are men. Now, I'm not getting into any gender stuff here, but the kind of fool that I'm talking about is a different kind of fool. It's the kind of fool that would have worked as an entertainer for a king and a queen and for the people at court. And the entertainer, the fool in this story, is a woman. And her name is Leonora. Now, Leonora has been on a long journey over many days and many nights. Her journey started in the summer, but as she has found herself walking across the land, the journey has taken her into the mellowing of autumn and into the frosts of winter. And she finds herself now in a wood, at the entrance to a labyrinth. But how did she get here? How did this fool, the favourite fool of the king and the queen of this land, how did she end up here? Well, for some years she worked at the palace, doing her thing, doing tricks with fire, singing, playing a variety of instruments, but most of all, telling stories, spinning tales, weaving wonders. She found many things working at the castle. She found friendship, she found loyalty, but most of all, she found love, true love. But then one day, at the end of a summer ball, her beloved stepped through a doorway, a mysterious doorway at the end of a mysterious corridor. And as he stepped through the doorway, she knew that he was going to a place that she couldn't follow. And so she tried to carry on telling her stories and spinning her tales to the court, to the king and the queen, but now it wasn't working. Now the stories seemed to lose their colour, and the words would turn to dust on her tongue. And so she decided to leave. And as she left, she didn't know where she was going to go. She just knew that she had to leave. And so she put her few possessions in a pack on her back, and she started to walk, just putting one foot in front of the other and trusting that her journey would take her where she needed to go. And her journey, it took her down dusty tracks and across lush, green meadows full of wildflowers. It took her through villages, busy market towns and cities, It took her across raging rivers and singing streams, over mountains and through valleys, and into the woods. And this is where we find her now, standing at the edge of a hawthorn thicket. And standing in front of her is a hare. And when she came into the woods, it was starting to get dark, but as her eyes adjusted to that closening darkness, she saw a movement out of the corner of her eye. It was a hare. And she had some memory of some story that maybe her mother had told her, of a girl who followed a hare, or was it a rabbit? Or whatever it was, she knew enough about stories to know that she must follow. And she followed the hare, and this is where it took her. She stands by the hawthorn thicket, and the hare is looking at her as if to say, "Come on then, what are you waiting for?" And so she steps forward, follows the hare into the opening of the hawthorn thicket, and finds herself walking along a path through the hawthorn hedge, which grows high up above her head. And the hare is running ahead of her, and she is running after the hare, and all the time she is weaving in and out and round, and not quite sure where this journey is going to take her. But all the time feeling a sense that she's getting closer and closer to the centre of this labyrinth. And that's when she realises that this is what this must be. It's a labyrinth. There was a labyrinth up at the castle, in the grounds. Of course, it was a lot neater and tidier and kept by the palace gardener. But this was definitely what this was. This was a labyrinth. And so she goes round and round and in and out, and all the time getting that sense of getting closer and closer to the centre of the labyrinth. And as she gets closer to the centre, she starts to feel a sense of fear rising inside her as she remembers stories of labyrinths and what might be found in their centre. But she keeps on moving forward, because moving forward has what has brought her on this journey, and so she has to keep going. And eventually, when the hare and when her feet bring her to the centre, she sees that she need not have feared. For inside the centre of this labyrinth there is no monster, there is no foul creature. Instead, there is a beautiful, ancient oak tree. She walks up to the tree and she rests her fingers against its ancient bark, and she strokes and feels the roughness on her skin. She rests the side of her face against its trunk, and she leans her weight into the tree and closes her eyes. And then she feels a nudging at her ankle, and looking down, she sees the hare, and he's looking up at her as if to say, "Come on, there's a little bit more." And so she follows the hare around the edge of the tree, all the way to the other side, where there appears to be a hollow at the bottom of the tree trunk. A hollow just big enough for her to fit inside. And so she finds herself crawling into the hollow, into that hole in the side of the tree. And there is just enough light coming in from outside for her to be able to see that there is enough space for her to stand up. And as her eyes adjust to the darkness inside the tree, she can see down by her feet there are steps, steps leading down into the earth. And so she starts to make her way down, making her descent down, deeper, deeper and deeper down into the earth. And the deeper she goes, the darker it gets, until she can no longer see anything anymore, and she just has to rely on touch of her hands and of her feet. And as she goes down deeper, deeper down into the earth, she feels held and surrounded by the earth, the smell of the soil in her nostrils, the warmth of the embrace of the earth itself. And as she continues her descent, she starts now to get a sense of lightening around her. And as she goes further down, she can see now that she is heading towards a cavern, right down there in the roots of this ancient oak tree. And eventually, finally, she reaches the last step and she looks around her. And there is not much light down here, only the light of a single candle. But it's just enough light for her to see, there, hidden among the roots, is an old, old woman. So old, she must be as old as the tree itself. Leonora steps a little closer, and by the light of that candle she can see her face, and the lines upon her face that look like a map of the many years that she has lived. And she sees movement of the old woman's gnarled fingers as she sits there weaving. And stepping a little bit closer, Leonora can see that what she is weaving is a web, a beautiful, beautiful web. Every thread a different colour. Threads of emerald green, sapphire blue, ruby red, gold threads that shine like the sun, and silver threads that glow like the moon. And she watches, mesmerised by the old woman's fingers weaving. And then, as if suddenly sensing her presence, the old woman looks up. "Ah," she says, "I've been waiting for you. And now you are here, and I am glad. Step closer, child. We have business together." And so Leonora steps closer. And as she does, there is something in the old woman's eyes, as they meet her eyes, that suddenly makes all of the sorrow and the grief that she has carried with her over these last days and weeks, suddenly she feels it washing over her, and the tears come easily to her eyes. And she falls to her knees by the feet of the old weaver woman. And the old weaver woman reaches down towards her and cradles her in her arms, smoothing her hair, rubbing her back and saying, "Shh, there." And then the old woman reaches for the web, and she holds it up in the candlelight, and she says, "My dear, as I have good medicine for you here. You see this? This is a web of stories. Every story that has ever been told is woven into this web. Why don't you get comfortable? And maybe I might share a tale with you. So Leonora settles, rests her head on the old woman's lap, and starts to settle into the warmth of this space and this time. And the old weaver woman, she reaches into the web and she holds up a thread and she says, "Now, let us see what we shall see." And Leonora has heard this refrain before from other storytellers. In fact, sometimes it has been a refrain that she has used herself. She knows that a story is about to be told, and so she opens her ears and she listens. The moon was looking down upon the people of the earth, and she felt sad. And the reason that she felt sad was because she could see that they were living in fear, and the thing that they feared was death. And the moon thought, if only I could just go down. If I could just go down there and I could share with them the message that they don't need to be afraid. But the moon realised that she couldn't go down there herself and that she would have to instead send a messenger. And so she called to her the spider. And she said, "Little spider, I have a very important message for you to take to the people of the earth. I want you to tell them that they are all going to die, but they need not be afraid, because every end is a beginning." You see, the moon knows this better than anyone else, because doesn't the moon die and get reborn every month? Go on then, little spider. Off you go. And so off went the spider. And she started to make her way down to the earth. And she picked her way down the moonbeams and the sunbeams, all the time holding that message in her mind of what she had to tell the people of the earth. And she was about halfway down when who should you bump into but the hare. "You're right then, spider. What are you doing? What are you doing? What are you up to? What are you up to?" said the hare. "Well, just so happens," said the spider, "that I've been given a very important message from the moon to take to the people of the earth." "Ooh, important message. Ooh, well, that does sound important," said the hare. "My goodness me. Well, do you know what? I tell you what, I'm really good at important messages. In fact, I am absolutely the perfect messenger because I'm so fleet of foot. I am faster than a speeding bullet. I could make my way around the earth in a fraction of the time it would take you, because let's just face it, I mean, you are actually rather slow, aren't you? Why don't you let me take the message? Oh, go on, please, please, please." Well, Spider thought about it for a minute and she thought, well, I don't know, because the moon did ask me to do it. But then she thought, well, I suppose if it's a really important message, then it's better that it gets out there quickly. Okay, right. What you need to tell the people of the earth is this. You need to tell them that they are all going to die. Right, tell all the people of the earth they're going to die. No problem. And off went the hare with only half of the moon's message. He hurtled down to the earth and he ran here and there. He ran all over the place, flapping his ears and wiggling his tail and going, "You're all going to die, you're all going to die, you're all going to die." Well, the people already knew that they were going to die and they were afraid, but now their fear was turning to panic. And the moon The moon, watching from up high in the sky, looked down at what was happening and just thought, oh, this is not what I wanted. This is the opposite of what I wanted. Oh, and she was so cross with the hare. She summoned the hare and she smacked him really hard on the nose. In fact, she smacked him so hard that she split his lip. And he still has a split lip to this very day. And then she summoned the spider once more and she said, "Oh, little spider," she said, "I chose you because I know that you are the one for this important message. So go on, go back to the earth and share this important message with the people." And so that's what the spider did. And the spider is taking her time because she doesn't rush around. She just takes her time because if a message is important, it's worth taking time over. And still to this day, the spider can be found in the corners of our homes and in our gardens, spinning her web and sharing an important message. But how many of us are actually going to listen? And of course, somebody who was listening, somebody who is listening, is Leonora. She lets the tale wash over her, and she takes it in. And she stretches, and she yawns, and she looks up at the old weaver woman, as if to say, "Don't stop. Tell me another one." And so the weaver woman holds up her web once more and looks to find the perfect thread. This one. Now, we shall see what we shall see. And Leonora opens up her ears and she opens up her mind to hear the story. There was once a king who wanted to live forever. He had everything his heart could possibly desire. He had a wonderful castle. He had a beautiful wife and a beautiful, loving and kind daughter. He had the finest clothes, he had gold and silver and jewels galore, and he ate the finest food. But what he wanted more than anything else was to live forever. And so he made a proclamation to the kingdom that anyone that could bring him the secret of eternal life could have their weight in gold every year for the rest of their life. Well, as you can imagine, it wasn't long before there was an enormous queue reaching out for about 3 miles from the palace gate. And the king couldn't wait to get started. Well, the first who was brought into the palace was a physician. And he opened up his leather bag and he took out a bottle. "Your Majesty," says he, "all you need is to take 3 spoonfuls of this twice a day, and it will lengthen your life quite considerably." "Wait a minute," said the king. Say that bit again, the bit about lengthening my life. I mean, how long exactly is it going to lengthen it for?" "Well, I should say it'd probably give you at least an extra 50 years. "Ha! 50 years, said the king. 50 years is hardly living forever, is it? But I suppose it'll do for now." And he took the medicine and he paid the man and he sent him on his way. Well, the next one to be shown in was a dietitian. And she had with her a great bag full of superfood and food supplements. "Your Majesty," says she, "the secret to a long and healthy life is the correct diet." And now you see here that I have a fine selection of superfoods which will give you longevity beyond your wildest dreams. "When you say longevity," said the king, "what exactly are we talking about here?" "Well, Your Majesty, if you're eating the right food and you're making sure that you're getting plenty of exercise, then, well, you could definitely live quite a bit longer." "Well, how much longer are we talking about here?" says the king. "Oh, well, I don't know, maybe as much as an extra 100 years, Your Majesty." Well, an extra 100 years is certainly nothing to be sniffed at, thought the king, but it's still not quite what I'm looking for. It's still not the immortality that I seek. But I'll take it anyway. And so he thanked the dietitian and paid her and sent her on her way. Next, there came into the palace a scientist, dragging behind him this great chest made of ice. "Now, Your Majesty, all you have to do is to climb into this chest and lay there for half an hour 3 times a day, and it will actually slow down the aging process and give you a considerably longer life." And the king said, "Well, when we're talking about considerably longer, I mean, how much considerably longer are we talking about?" "Oh, I don't know," said the scientist. "I mean, it could be as much as an extra 150 years. "Oh, well, 150 years. Yes, and there's more as well. When the time does actually come for your Royal Highness to leave this world, then your body can be placed inside the chest of ice and, kept on ice, as it were, until a cure is found for the thing that killed you. Not bad, eh?" Well, the king was starting to think that this was looking a bit more promising. And so he kept the chest of ice and paid the scientist and sent him on his way. And over the next 3 days, many people came into the palace, each one of them convinced that they had the secrets of a long and healthy life. But of course, none of them were actually giving the king what he actually wanted, which was to not even die at all in the first place. And then at the end of the 3rd day, there came into the palace an old man. He was shown into the king's throne room, and through his wizened old eyes he said, "Your Majesty, there is only one way that you can truly achieve immortality, and that is to drink from the fountain of eternity." The fountain of eternity. And if I drink the water from there, then I will live forever. "I can guarantee it," said the old man. "Oh, well, in that case, we must find this fountain immediately." "Thank you. And when I find the water, I will pay you handsomely. But here's a little bit, a retainer, if you will." And he placed a bag of gold coins in the old man's hand. Well, without delay, the king recruited a great army of people to go out into the world to see if they could find this fountain of eternity and to bring back the water for the king. But in the meantime, the king wasn't going to take any chances against that rascal they called death. He ordered for his architect to employ some of the best builders across the land to come and build a thick, high wall around the castle, thick enough and high enough to keep death out. Now, this project took some time, a couple of years, I believe it might have been, and the wall grew thicker and higher, and the king started to feel a little bit more secure now that he knew that that rascal Death wouldn't be able to get to him. But then one day death did come. But not for him. And not, in fact, for any member of his family. You see, the princess had a little white rat. Her mother had got it for her as a pet. Because she could see how the princess missed her father. Because ever since the king had become obsessed with his quest for immortality, it seemed like he had time for nothing else. Nothing else interested him. All he would do is stand at the top of his enormous wall every day, looking out for a sign that somebody had returned with water from the fountain of eternity. The princess had watched her father slipping away from her. Her father, who once used to play games and chase her in the palace gardens and read bedtime stories to her every night. She didn't know where he had gone. And her mother, the queen, seeing how this saddened her so, had brought for her as a pet this little white rat, who soon became the princess's best friend and playmate. But then one night, death came to the castle. And he didn't come for the king or the queen or the princess or for anyone else in the court. He came for the princess's little white rat. And when the king heard the heartbreaking, heartrending sobs of his daughter echoing down the corridors of the castle, something inside him started to rise up, a feeling of sorrow, a feeling of love. He walked down the corridor and stood outside the princess's room, listening to her cries. And the feeling started to grow and rise up. But no, he pushed it down. He had no place for these feelings that just reminded him that death was still in the world, that death was still in his world and was still able to get into the castle. And so therefore he must get more people to come and build the wall stronger and higher. And so he ordered that half the people across the land must give up their work and must join the effort to build the wall. And so they did. Teachers, farmers, merchants, accountants and quantity surveyors all gave up their jobs and joined in with the effort to build the wall, to build it thicker and to build it higher. And the days and the weeks and the months passed. And the king thought, right, this is it. This is it. Death won't be getting into this castle now. But it was not so easy to keep death out. You see, because the king, in his wisdom, had decided to make it a law for people not to express their sadness and express their grief. Because this expression of sadness and grief, again, only served as a reminder that death was ever present. And so the king ordered by royal decree that nobody was to cry. Nobody was to express their sorrow. And now a sickness had begun to spread across the kingdom. A strange kind of sickness, and nobody really knew where it came from. But some say that this sickness came from the tears that people were unable to cry during this time, and that somehow the tears were able to fill their bodies and to bring them to a sickness, almost like they were drowning in their own tears. And then one day the queen fell sick with the sickness, and she took to her bed. And as the days passed, in spite of all the king's best efforts, as he spared no expense in getting the finest doctors and physicians from across the land to bring her medicines of every description. There was nothing that could stop the inevitable progress of what was happening to his queen. As her skin began to grow pale and the light began to fade from her eyes. And then one day, she looked him in the eye and she said, "Darling, it is my time. It is time to say goodbye." And he kissed her one last time. She took one last breath and she was gone. And the king felt that same feeling rising up inside him, rising up higher and higher until it felt like it might pour from him. But no, he pushed it back down again. And instead of tending to his grief and his sorrow, he had the queen's body placed inside the chamber of ice. And the years passed, and the years passed. And then one day, a cure was found for the sickness. And the king wasted no time at all in having this precious medicine brought to the palace. The ice chest was opened, and the queen's body was lifted out and laid upon the bed, and 3 drops of the medicine placed upon her tongue. And as the medicine slipped down her throat, she took a breath, and she was back in the world. And she looked into the eyes of her husband, the king, with confusion and bewilderment. And then she rose from the bed and walked out of the room and walked off down the corridor. And as the days and weeks passed, the queen walked through the rooms and the corridors of the castle as if she was a ghost. And her daughter, the princess, couldn't bear to see what was happening. And so she went to her father, the king, and she said, "Father, I miss Mother as much as anyone, but I can't bear to see her like this. This is not right. She should not be here. Please, please, will you let her go? You let her go once before, now you must do so again." And the king looked into the eyes of his daughter, and he knew that she was right. And so that night, he took his wife in his arms, and he held her, and he said to her, "It's okay. You can go now." And the queen smiled in gratitude and in peace, and then she was gone. And now that feeling that started to rise up in the king, he knew that he couldn't push it down any longer. But he didn't know what to do with it, and he wanted to run away. He wanted to run away from this feeling. And he ran down the corridors of the castle, and he ran until he came to the wall. And then he climbed to the top of the wall, and he stood right at the very top, looking out over the land. A land that had become desolate at his hand. For in the building of his wall, all of the quarries had been mined of their stone. New quarries had to be made. And so now the land just looked so desolate and so barren. And the king looked around at everything that he'd done. And he thought about his wife, and he thought about his daughter, and he thought about his kingdom, and all the suffering that he had created because he had wanted to live forever. And then a single tear started to form in the corner of his eye, and it ran down his cheek, and it fell from his face, and it landed on the earth. And then another tear from his other eye, and another, and another, and another, and his tears fell down upon the earth. And the tears became a puddle, and then the puddle became a pond, and then the pond formed a stream, and the stream became a river, flowing through the land, bringing life back to the land everywhere that it flowed. And the king knew that it was time for him to leave the castle for the first time in all these years. And so he set forth. He set forth on a journey that took him across the land, and everywhere he went, he could see life returning, green shoots coming from the ground, blossom forming on the trees, the birds singing. And he walked for many days and many nights, until eventually his walking brought him to a clearing. And in that clearing was a beautiful crystal fountain. And standing next to the fountain was the wizened old man, who took a glass and filled it with water from the fountain. And he handed it to the king. "Your journey has brought you here, Your Majesty. Will you now drink from the fountain of eternity?" And the king took the glass, holding it in his hand for a moment, and then he tipped it, and he poured the water upon the earth. And he said, "I think perhaps I would rather not live forever after all." "Well, in that case," said the old man, "do you think now that you're ready to come with me?" "Yes," said the king, "I think I am." And so the king collapsed into the arms of death, for of course that is who the old man was. And death gently and tenderly scooped him up in his arms and held him so tenderly as a parent might hold a child. And he carried him off into eternity. And as for the princess, well, she ruled over that land. And of course the first thing that she did was to tear down the wall. And the next thing she did was to tell the story of her father. So perhaps in some way or another, maybe he did achieve eternity after all. Leonora shifted and stirred, soaking up the medicine of that last story. And she looked up one more time into the eyes of the weaver woman, as if to say, just one more. And of course, as all we storytellers know, everything has to come in threes. And so the old woman searched her web to find one more story. And Leonora opened her ears and opened her mind and opened her heart to listen. many years ago, when there were no people on the earth, only animals. There was no death. And so the animals weren't afraid. But then one day, a young cockatoo who was learning to fly crash landed upon the earth. And he lay there on the grass, so still. And all the animals gathered around, and they were confused, and they didn't know what had happened to the cockatoo. What has happened to our brother? He is there, but he is not there. He does not breathe, he does not see. And they asked the owl if he knew. And they asked the eagle if he knew. But they could shed no light. They could shed no light on this mystery. The only thing that the eagle could do was to pick up a stone and drop it into the lake. And as it plunged down, he said, our brother has gone into another existence. Well, the animals weren't quite sure whether this was shedding any light on the mystery at all, and so they asked the crow. And the crow picked up a stick, and he dropped that into the lake, and the stick disappeared for a moment. And then it came back up to the surface. Said the crow. He has gone into another existence, but maybe he'll return, perhaps in another way. Well, the animals thought this was an interesting idea, and so they decided they wanted to find out more. And they said, who here among us will go and lie very still and not seeing and not eating and not hearing, and will come back and share their wisdom with us? Well, there were quite a few animals who were happy to volunteer. There was the snake and the wombat and the opossum and the goanna. And they all went. And throughout the winter, they lay very still, and they did not see, and they did not hear, and they did not eat. And when they came back in the spring, well, they looked a lot thinner. And Snake had a new coat, but other than that, there was still no answer to the mystery. But then the caterpillars came forward, and they said, we would like to try. Well, the animals scoffed at the idea of this. They thought, these caterpillars, they are so tiny, what can they do? But they were quite determined. And they said, we would like to help. We will see you in the spring, up on the mountain, but we might look quite different. And so off they went, the caterpillars, and they lay very still, not seeing, not eating, not speaking. And then in the spring, there was a great hubbub of excitement among the animals as they went to the mountain to meet with the caterpillars. And they looked all around because they remembered that the caterpillars had said that they might look quite different. But nothing prepared them for what they saw when the caterpillars returned. For as they looked up into the sky, they saw a cloud coming towards them. But as the cloud came closer, they could see that this was not a cloud, but this is made of many, many specks of light, fluttering light and colour. They were butterflies, the first butterflies, and how beautiful they were as they fluttered around the animals, resting on rocks and trees and flowers. And the animals were filled with joy because the caterpillars had shown them that maybe even after death, perhaps there is maybe something else. Perhaps there is something beautiful. And for the first time since the world began, the birds started to sing. And Leonora, as she lay there with her head resting on the lap of the weaver woman, it was almost as if she heard the song of the birds waking her up from her sleep. She stretched, she stood up and she looked around her, and there, hanging from the root, one of the roots of the oak tree, she saw a chrysalis, a little brown, papery chrysalis. And she could see the movement of the butterfly within as it struggled to release itself. She said, "Oh, poor thing. See how it's struggling. Maybe I should help it out." "But no, no," said the old weaver woman, "you mustn't. If you were to help the butterfly out of its chrysalis, it wouldn't be strong enough to fly. It has to struggle so that it can be strong." And so Leonora watched as the butterfly continued to struggle, and then suddenly a crack appeared in the chrysalis, and the butterfly pushed its wings out, pumped them full with blood and colour, and then it was free. And the butterfly fluttered around the cavern, down in the earth under the ancient oak tree, fluttering 3 times around Leonora's head. "Thank you," said Leonora to the old weaver woman. And they held each other in an embrace and said their goodbyes. "Follow the butterfly," said the old weaver woman. "She knows where to go." And so Leonora did exactly that. She followed the butterfly up, up, back up the steps, out of the tree, climbing out of the earth, back through the hollow in the side of the ancient oak tree, and out into the light. And where the year had been turning to winter before she went into the tree, into the earth, now, here, it seemed that spring was coming back to the land. And the hare was waiting for her. And so she followed the hare and the butterfly, and the 3 of them made their way out of the labyrinth and back out into the world. And with the spring sun upon her face, and with new stories and new hope in her heart, Leonora set forth. And wherever she went, she shared the stories that she had learnt, that she had heard from the old weaver woman. And over time, many of her other stories that she had once told returned to her too, but now with even more colour and vibrancy and wisdom. And so maybe, one day, you never know, you might just hear one of her stories. Perhaps you are hearing one of them now. And perhaps you may hear many others here at the World Storytelling Cafe. Thank you for listening. I've really enjoyed sharing this story with you. I just would like to say, before I go, would like to remind you that just down here is the virtual hat. So if you have enjoyed this story and you'd like to chuck a few coins in there, that would be amazing and very much appreciated. Go well and enjoy the stories. Bye-bye.
Did you enjoy that story? Of course you did. Like they said, if you want to put a contribution in, go to the hat beneath the story on worldstorytellingcafe.com. And, well, you remember the song, Buddy, can you spare me a dime? Well, I'm sure every storyteller would appreciate a little in the hat. I'm going to pass it round. Thank you, sir. Thank you, madam. That's most appreciated. Whoa! Whoa! Oh! 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 No, that is fantastic. Thank you. Thank you. And even better. Ladies and gentlemen, that you have done just a little rattle there, just a little rattle, and oh, my hat is nearly full, and that storyteller you've just listened to will eat for a few days because we're all stuck without being able to go out and perform. We love you all, and we love the fact that you've listened to the stories. And if you can afford it, buddy, can you spare me a dime?